Well, thanks a lot for those kind words and challenging questions, Tom, and for your willingness to plow through the book and do this for us tonight. Thanks a lot to Crux Books, too, for sponsoring this event and hosting it and giving us this great, gorgeous, scholarly space. I really encourage all of you to, check them out. They're downstairs right below us, and they got a great selection and really good prices, too. So, I'll answer Tom's questions, but I'd also like to invite, there's a lot of people in the crowd here who have read Rorty and maybe some who haven't, but, so I'll say a few words in response to Tom's questions, but then I'd like to also, if people want to join in, feel free and we can maybe throw it open, but maybe say a few things a bit about, first about maybe why would a Christian philosopher write a book by such an outspoken atheist and be sympathetic to that outspoken atheist. That might be a weird kind of place to start. But there's something about Rorty I really love. It was a labor of love working on this book. When Hank Hart trained in me to have the ear to hear his authentic voice, then I became to have this really deep appreciation for a very serious thinker who wasn't just out to undermine, the cherished beliefs of others, whether they were religious or, rationalist metaphysicians, or, he wasn't just an ironic debunker of cherished truths, a Socratic gadfly, but he had real serious, ethical, cultural, social reasons for pushing this kind of agenda that he was pushing. So, and that was very attractive to me. I saw someone who was actually quite upfront about, as a secular atheist, of not giving himself what you call the know better position. I know better than you, that's why I'm an atheist. It was just, this is where I find myself standing, and this is, so in answer to your first question, could he have been more open to religious voices as potential contributors to solidarity? The place to start is, Rorty, when he talks he has a lot of religious interlocutors, but he says, I grew up in a home where religion just wasn't, my parents, even though his mother was the daughter of Walter Rauschenbusch, the social gospel theologian, it was a secular humanist home. And in Trotsky and the Wild Orchids, he says, the two books on their fireplace mantle was the Trotsky trial books, the Not Guilty, and I can't remember the title of the other one, but he says that's the books that resonated moral truth and splendor, akin to my friends' family Bibles, it was this kind of, and he quite frankly says that when it comes to religion, he says he doesn't have an ear for it. He calls himself religiously unmusical. So he has this kind of humble, okay, well, you want to know what I think about religion? Well, I'm not an expert, and and I'm kind of ham-handed with it, and he says that right up front. But then again, of course, that doesn't stop him. So the piece he's most famous for, when it comes to talking about religion and the cultural influence of religion in the West, is the Screed, his review of Carter's book, Stephen Carter's book, and the title of the paper is "Religion as Conversation Stopper." And it's a very unpragmatic piece in that he makes very sweeping, large brush claims about religion as essentially this. It's essentially a conversation stopper. It's a bunch of authoritarian bullies trying to tell people what to think, to impose dogma and indoctrinate people, and it has it doesn't belong in a democratic society and all that kind of thing. He invokes the traditional liberal private-public distinction, say that's okay if you want to believe that in private, just don't bring it into the public discussions. And he was thoroughly chastised for that view. And it's kind of interesting. A colleague of mine at the U of T, Simone Chambers, teaches that in her religion and public policy course. And she describes Rorty as a more sophisticated Richard Dawkins. So she does put him in the know better camp. And I actually think in that piece, he's not any more sophisticated than Richard Dawkins. It's basically kind of a Dawkins-Hitchens kind of rant. And but that's when you read his entire corpus, there's this other Rorty. There's this Rorty who's read the Gospels and Paul, and who quotes Corinthians, the love passages, affirmatively, and uses them. And this actually gets at your second question about tradition, because he uses those, in his conversations with Gianni Vattimo, he quotes Corinthians, and he says, secular atheists can get get a lot out of this because it's about, it's about the future and a future of promise, a future of hope that, where suffering ends and justice and peace embrace and all these sorts of things. And he says, I'm animated by that hope too. And he says, the only difference between Vittimo and me is he has gratitude for a tradition that gave him this view. And I'm free of that kind of sense of gratitude. I just have this expectant hope for a better future. And I'm like, well, just wait. You were just using Corinthians to describe your position. So there's this kind of acknowledgement, and then he takes it away right away. And one of the images he uses is he talks about a ladder that you can throw away. And he actually, I think, in one of his essays on Clifford Geertz, he talks about being grateful that liberal societies in the West have this Christian heritage so that, we have social structures and legal systems that, presume to account for the poor, the marginalized, the minorities. And he's glad, and he even says, he says, a freeloading atheist like myself is grateful in these moments that that's our history, but now it's a ladder that we can throw away. And I think that's fundamentally where I disagree with Rorty, is I don't actually think that's a ladder you can throw away, obviously. Because if it was, then maybe I wouldn't be a Christian anymore, and I'm still a Christian. I still feel like I'm on the ladder. But that ladder image is interesting because it comes out of that deep pragmatist tradition that Stout calls Emersonian perfectionism. And Emerson had the sense of holiness and sacrality is that as you go through life, your responsibility is to strive for excellence and to take wherever you find yourself on the steps or on the ladder, you have to take the next step up. But there is in pragmatism, and that's, I don't really know exactly, but there's this sense that the steps you've left behind or the past you've left behind ought not to be experienced as some sort of oppressive weight that holds you back or constricts where you can go into the future. And that's very interesting. I think it's very challenging for religious people to hear that as well. And then sometimes I think the pragmatists need a bit more of a hermeneutic sensitivity to their indebtedness to tradition, their belongingness to tradition, and the fact that they couldn't imagine the kind of future they want to imagine without that past behind them that opened the vista that they currently see. So, so the question on Rorty and religion is related because there's a sense in which he's relying on a tradition that he simultaneously eschews. And I guess my nudges were kind of to try to explore that tension and say, why couldn't a pragmatist be more sort of, and I think someone who achieves this is Geoffrey Stout as a pragmatist, who's not religious himself, but recognizes the signal contributions that religious voices can make to pluralistic dialogue for a future of justice and peace. And calls Rorty to task for things he says in Religion as Conversation Stoppers being unhelpful in that pluralistic dialogue that our society needs to have. There's so much polarization. I mean, I think that's one of the most lamentable things about the culture war between the new atheists and the defenders of religion is that it's just this polemical, I have unpolite terms for it, but I can't use those in public, but it's a spitting match, we'll say, but I use a different word usually. And what our society needs actually, and that's what I actually try to practice in the book, is more sympathetic engagement with not like, man, like the guys on my hockey team in the dressing room don't know I'm a Christian. I hear them talking about how can people believe that BS kind of stuff, rather than thinking, well, yeah, how could people believe what seems to me so manifestly erroneous? Maybe, they could ask the Wittgenstein question, if for a mistake, that's just too big. Do you know what I mean? Sir James George Fraser thought the ethnic tribes that he was studying when they were doing their rain dances were actually thought that that's mechanically how you made it rain. And Wittgenstein got really upset by this uncharitable reading of their religious ritual. And he says, well, it's funny that they only dance in the rainy season and not in the dry season. Maybe they're not making a mistake. For a mistake, that's too big. And I wish more people would do that on both sides. Like, for existential reasons in my life, I have to understand why people reject religion. and what good reasons they have for doing so. And I have sympathy for a lot of that. I mean, for a lot of what you see passing for Christianity in the media is, quite frankly, abhorrent. And then when people find out you're a Christian, they right away associate you with all this nasty stuff. And then you have to enter this death by 1,000 qualifications until finally you just say, no, I'm a Christian, and just come what may. And if you think what you want to think, and that's... But if you knew coming from the secular side that there was a bit more, hey, that's interesting, but I want to get to know you. And I want to, and you seem like an intelligent person, so there must be something else going on besides the stuff that I just ridicule, and vice versa. That's sort of, I think, where the conversation in society needs to go. So I don't know if that's adequate enough to answer your question, but I mean, that might be a way to, an initial response anyway. But anyway, thank you everybody for coming out. It's really, it's quite humbling actually to have everybody here and celebrating this with me. It's been great. But anybody else have any questions for anything Tom said, or want to shoot anything?